Sarah's first night in the Cathani city challenged every assumption she had ever made about comfort and shelter. Silver, who speaks with rivers, had guided her to a guest chamber within one of the great trees, a space that had been shaped specifically for her visit. The living walls glowed with a soft bioluminescence that adjusted to her circadian rhythms, gradually dimming as evening approached. The bed was perhaps the most remarkable thing she had ever experienced. Rather than traditional furniture, it was a living nest of modified moss and plant fibers that responded to her body temperature and position, providing perfect support while remaining surprisingly comfortable. The walls themselves seemed to breathe gently, creating a subtle air circulation that kept the space fresh and perfectly oxygenated. As Sarah lay in the alien bed, the translator artifact resting warm against her palm, she reflected on the enormity of what she had learned. The gentle sounds of the forest city at night filtered through the walls, soft conversations between Cathani families, the rustle of wind through living architecture, and a harmonious humming that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. Through the walls, she could sense the vast network of life that surrounded her. Every tree, every vine, every flower was connected in a web of biological communication that the Cathani had learned to read and influence over millennia. It was technology beyond anything humans had achieved, yet it felt utterly natural and peaceful. Sleep came surprisingly easily despite the alien environment. The living chamber seemed to sense her needs, adjusting humidity and temperature to keep her comfortable throughout the night. Sarah's dreams were filled with visions of towering trees that sang with voices like silver bells, and wolves whose fur told stories in languages older than human civilization. She awoke to find Swift Current Dancer waiting patiently outside her chamber, clearly excited to continue serving as her guide. Through the translator, the young Cathani conveyed enthusiasm about showing Sarah the workshops where their biotechnology was developed and refined. This was to be a day of discovery that would reveal the true depth of Cathani scientific achievement. Their first stop was a workshop, dedicated to what the Cathani called life-shaping. Sarah watched in fascination as skilled artisans worked with living materials, encouraging growth patterns that resulted in tools, containers, and even complex machinery. A master craftsman demonstrated how to convince a vine to grow into the perfect shape for a harvesting basket, while another guided the development of a plant that could serve as a sophisticated water purification system. The most impressive workshop was devoted to medical biotechnology. Sarah observed Cathani healers working with organisms that could diagnose and treat injuries or illnesses with remarkable precision. They showed her plants that could produce any necessary medicine by analyzing a patient's blood chemistry, and healing pods that could accelerate recovery from even severe trauma. Through the translator, the chief healer explained that they had eliminated most diseases centuries ago by developing symbiotic organisms that strengthened their immune systems. Age-related decline was slowed dramatically through similar biological partnerships. Many Cathani lived for several centuries, accumulating wisdom and experience while maintaining physical vitality. Sarah's scientific mind was reeling. The implications for human medicine were staggering. Diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia could potentially be eliminated. The aging process itself might be slowed or even reversed. But the healers made it clear that this knowledge came with responsibilities. The symbiotic organisms required careful balance and deep understanding of biological systems. They could not simply be transplanted to human physiology without extensive research and adaptation. The afternoon was spent learning about Cathani transportation technology. Swift Current Dancer led Sarah to a grove, where magnificent creatures that resembled a cross between birds and flying squirrels rested in the branches. These were not wild animals, but living vehicles that had been developed through centuries of careful breeding and genetic guidance. A Cathani pilot demonstrated how one of these creatures could carry passengers across vast distances, navigating by instinct and providing a comfortable, safe journey. The partnership between pilot and mount was so close that they seemed to share thoughts and emotions, working together with perfect coordination. But even more impressive were the star vessels that the Cathani had developed for interplanetary travel. Sarah was taken to a secluded grove where one such craft rested between journeys. It looked more like a massive tree than a spacecraft, with bark-like skin and branch-like protrusions that served as sensors and manipulators. The vessel's pilot, an ancient Cathani whose title translated as Walker Between Worlds, explained through the translator how these living ships functioned. They were essentially mobile ecosystems, capable of sustaining themselves and their passengers during journeys that could last decades or even centuries. The ships grew their own fuel, recycled all waste products, and could even repair damage by regenerating damaged tissue. Sarah learned that the Cathani had used such vessels to explore dozens of star systems, always searching for other intelligent life and suitable worlds for expansion. They had established colonies on 7 different planets, each adapted to local conditions while maintaining the core principles of biological harmony. The pilot conveyed that humans could learn to work with these living ships, but it would require a fundamental shift in thinking. Human technology was based on controlling and dominating materials and forces. Cathani technology was based on partnership and cooperation with living systems. The two approaches could complement each other, but integration would require patience and mutual understanding. As evening approached, Silver, who speaks with rivers, took Sarah to the city's central gathering place, a vast hollow within the largest tree where the community met to share news and make collective decisions. Hundreds of Cathani had assembled, their fur patterns creating a constantly shifting display of color and light as they communicated among themselves. Sarah realized that she was witnessing Cathani democracy in action. Unlike human political systems based on competition and majority rule, the Cathani sought consensus through patient discussion and genuine listening. Each individual's perspective was valued and considered, no matter how young or old, experienced or naive. Through the translator, Sarah could follow fragments of the discussion. They were debating her presence and what it meant for their future. Some argued for immediate full contact with humanity, eager to begin the process of partnership and mutual learning. Others counseled caution, pointing to previous encounters with aggressive species that had ended badly. But the tone of the debate was never hostile or divisive. Even those who disagreed with each other maintained respect and affection. The goal was not to win arguments, but to find the path forward that would benefit everyone involved, including the humans whose fate was being discussed. Keeper of Deep Memories rose to address the assembly, and the Ancient One's words carried tremendous weight. Through the translator, Sarah understood that the Elder was sharing the full history of Cathani contact with other species, including detailed accounts of both successes and failures. The lesson was clear. Each encounter was unique, and past experience could guide but not dictate future decisions. The Ancient One then did something that surprised everyone present. Keeper of Deep Memories invited Sarah to address the assembly directly, to speak for her species and help the Cathani understand what partnership with humanity might truly mean. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of intelligent alien gazes upon her. These beings held the power to transform human civilization, or to leave humanity struggling alone among the stars. Everything she said in the next few minutes could determine the course of both species for generations to come. Through the translator, she began to speak about humanity's journey to the stars. She told them about Earth, about the struggles and triumphs that had shaped human civilization. She spoke honestly about human flaws, their tendency toward conflict, their sometimes destructive relationship with nature, their struggles with greed and short-term thinking. But she also spoke about human virtues, their resilience in the face of adversity, their creativity and innovation, their capacity for growth and change. She described how humans had begun to learn from their mistakes, developing new technologies and social systems that prioritized sustainability and cooperation. The colony on this world was itself an example of humanity's evolving wisdom. Most importantly, Sarah conveyed her own transformation through contact with the Cathani. In just a few days, her understanding of what civilization could be had expanded dramatically. The rescue of Swift Current Dancer had seemed like a simple act of compassion, but it had opened doors to possibilities she had never imagined. She told the assembly that humans needed partners, not subjects or masters. They needed teachers who could help them develop wisdom to match their ambition. In return, humans could offer their own unique gifts, their drive to explore and discover, their ability to adapt to new situations, their talent for finding innovative solutions to complex problems. When Sarah finished speaking, the assembly fell silent. The patterns on hundreds of Cathani coats shifted and swirled as the Cathani city defied every assumption Sarah had ever made about alien civilizations. As she followed Silver, who speaks with rivers, higher into the canopy, she found herself walking through a three-dimensional community that existed in harmony with the forest ecosystem. Bridges of woven vines connected massive tree trunks, while spiraling ramps carved from living wood allowed movement between different levels of the city. The most incredible aspect was how alive everything was. The buildings weren't just built from organic materials. They were actual living organisms that had been guided and shaped over generations. Walls breathed gently, floors yielded slightly underfoot like firm moss, and windows were actually transparent membranes that could adjust their opacity, with a thought from their inhabitants. Cathany citizens moved through their city with graceful efficiency, some traveling along the vine bridges while others leaped from branch to branch with breathtaking agility. Children played in garden spaces that hung suspended between the great trees, their laughter carrying through the air like music. Sarah watched in amazement as families gathered in hollow tree trunks that had been shaped into comfortable living spaces, complete with furniture that had been grown rather than built. Through the translator artifact, Swift Current Dancer eagerly shared details about daily life in the city. The young Cathani explained how the trees were not just homes but partners, responsive to the needs and emotions of their inhabitants. When someone was sick, the tree would adjust its chemistry to provide healing compounds. When the weather turned harsh, the structure would thicken its walls and increase insulation. Silver, who speaks with rivers, led Sarah to a platform high in the canopy where the view opened up dramatically. From this vantage point, she could see that the city extended much farther than she had imagined. Thousands of Cathani lived in this forest metropolis, their numbers hidden by the perfect integration with their environment. In the distance, she could see other forest cities connected by networks of tree bridges that spanned valleys and rivers. The pack leader conveyed that what Sarah was seeing represented only a small portion of Cathani civilization. Their people had spread across the entire continent, creating a network of sustainable communities that had existed for over 10,000 years without causing significant environmental damage. They had achieved something that humans struggled with: true harmony between technology and nature. As Sarah absorbed this revelation, a new Cathani approached their platform. This individual was clearly ancient, with fur that had turned silver-white with age and eyes that held depths of wisdom Sarah could barely comprehend. The patterns on its fur moved slowly and deliberately, displaying symbols that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Silver, who speaks with rivers, conveyed that this was Keeper of Deep Memories, the eldest member of their community, and one of the most respected individuals in all of Cathani society. The Ancient One had requested to meet the human who had saved Swift Current Dancer, and its presence here was a tremendous honor. Through the translator, Keeper of Deep Memories shared memories that stretched back generations. Sarah experienced flashes of Cathani history, the early days when they first achieved sapience, their gradual development of biotechnology, their encounters with other species, both successful and tragic. She learned that the Cathani had made contact with 17 different alien civilizations over the millennia, but only 3 of those encounters had ended in lasting friendship. The others had ended in conflict, exploitation, or mutual destruction. Keeper of Deep Memories shared the pain of watching promising relationships collapse when cultural differences proved insurmountable. Some species had been too aggressive, unable to understand the Cathani philosophy of harmony. Others had been too passive, unwilling to engage meaningfully with alien concepts. A few had simply been incompatible at such a fundamental level that meaningful communication was impossible. But humans, the Ancient One conveyed, represented something new. Sarah's spontaneous act of rescue had demonstrated qualities that the Cathani valued above all others: empathy across species lines, willingness to take risks for others, and the ability to act decisively in crisis situations. These were the foundation traits that made true partnership possible. Keeper of Deep Memories then shared something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The Cathani had not just been passively observing the human colony. They had been actively protecting it. Through the translator, Sarah learned that the forest around the human settlement was home to several species of dangerous predators that had been kept at bay by Cathani intervention. Weather patterns had been subtly influenced to prevent destructive storms from striking the colony. Geological surveys that humans attributed to luck had actually been guided by Cathani knowledge of the planet's mineral resources. The humans had been under benevolent protection since their arrival, watched over by a species they had never even known existed. The Chthoni had been testing humanity's character, waiting to see if the newcomers would prove worthy of contact and eventual partnership. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications. "Why?" she asked through the translator. "Why take such care of strangers?" Keeper of Deep Memories conveyed an emotion so complex that the translator struggled to render it in human terms. It was a mixture of hope, loneliness, and deep philosophical conviction. The Chthoni believed that consciousness was the rarest and most precious thing in the universe. Every intelligent species that emerged was a unique perspective on existence, an irreplaceable voice in the cosmic conversation. To lose any such voice through carelessness or conflict was a tragedy beyond measure. The Ancient One had lived through the extinction of two allied species, both lost to wars with more aggressive civilizations. The weight of that loss had shaped Chthoni policy for centuries. They would not stand by and watch another intelligent species destroy itself or be destroyed if they could prevent it. But protection was only the first step. True partnership required mutual understanding and respect, qualities that could only be demonstrated through individual actions. Sarah's rescue of Swift Current Dancer had been the sign they were waiting for, proof that humans were capable of the selfless behavior that formed the foundation of Chthoni ethics. Swift Current Dancer moved closer to Sarah, and through the translator she felt the young one's excitement and gratitude. The rescue had been more than just a life-saving act. It had been the key that unlocked the possibility of a relationship that could benefit both species immensely. Silver, who speaks with rivers, began to convey the scope of what partnership with the Chthoni could mean for humanity. Their biotechnology could solve many of the problems that plagued human colonies: food production, medical care, environmental adaptation, even space travel. The Chthoni had developed biological spacecraft capable of journeying between stars, living ships that could sustain themselves and their passengers on voyages lasting centuries. But the benefits would not be one-sided. Humans possessed qualities that the Chthoni valued highly: adaptability, creativity, and what they termed constructive restlessness. Where the Chthoni excelled at harmony and sustainability, humans excelled at innovation and exploration. Together, the two species could achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. Keeper of Deep Memories stood and moved to the edge of the platform, gazing out over the vast expanse of forest cities. Through the translator, the Ancient One shared a vision of the future. Humans and Chthoni working together to explore the galaxy, each contributing their unique strengths to the partnership. New worlds could be settled using Chthoni biotechnology and human adaptability. Other intelligent species could be contacted and evaluated for potential alliance. But first, humanity had to make a choice. The Chthoni would not force contact or partnership on anyone. The decision had to be made freely, with full understanding of both the opportunities and the responsibilities involved. Sarah's rescue of Swift Current Dancer had opened the door, but walking through it would require the consensus of both species. The Ancient One conveyed that the Chthoni were prepared to wait. They had learned patience over their long history. If humanity needed time to consider the implications, that time would be granted. But if the offer was refused, or if humans proved unworthy of the trust being offered, the Chthoni would withdraw, their protection and retreat to the deep forests, where human technology could never find them. Sarah realized that she was being entrusted with the most important decision in human history. The artifact in her hands represented not just a translation device, but the key to humanity's future in the galaxy. She could return to the colony and share this knowledge with her fellow humans, opening negotiations that could transform both civilizations. Or she could keep the secret to herself, protecting the Chthoni from potential human aggression, while denying her own species the greatest opportunity they had ever been offered. The weight of choice was crushing, but as Sarah looked around at the magnificent civilization that surrounded her, she knew what she had to do. The beauty and wisdom of the Chthoni, their patient protection of her species, their willingness to share their knowledge and technology, all of it pointed toward a future of cooperation and mutual growth. But first, she needed to understand more. Sarah's hand trembled as she held the alien artifact, its warm surface pulsing gently against her palm. The pack leader stood before her, and she could feel the weight of expectation in the air. This was clearly more than a simple gift exchange. This was a moment that would define the relationship between two species, and Sarah was acutely aware that her response would echo far beyond this riverside encounter. The pack leader made a series of low, complex sounds, then moved closer to Sarah. She held perfectly still as the magnificent creature circled her slowly, not in a threatening manner, but with the careful attention of someone taking measure. Sarah could smell its scent, wild and clean, mixed with something else that reminded her of ozone after a lightning storm. When the pack leader completed its circle, it sat directly in front of Sarah and fixed her with an unwavering stare. Then it began to do something extraordinary. The patterns in its fur started to shift and change in deliberate ways, creating recognizable shapes and symbols. Sarah watched in amazement as the creature's coat became a living canvas, displaying what could only be described as a form of written language. The young wolf she had rescued moved to stand beside the pack leader, and its fur began to display similar patterns, but these were different, simpler, clearly representing the story of its rescue. Sarah could actually follow the narrative as it played out across the creature's body. The fall into the water, the struggle against the current, the appearance of a strange figure, the rescue, and the safe return to shore. When the display finished, both wolves looked at Sarah expectantly. She realized they were waiting for some kind of response, but she had no idea what they expected. She looked down at the artifact in her hands, noting how its patterns seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Acting on pure instinct, Sarah began to speak, not in any language the wolves could understand, but in the tone and rhythm she had used when talking to the young wolf during its rescue. She told them about herself, about Earth, about humanity's journey to the stars and their hope of finding peaceful coexistence with other intelligent species. As she spoke, something remarkable happened. The artifact in her hands grew warmer, and its patterns began to shift more rapidly. The wolves' ears perked up, and their fur patterns became more animated. Sarah realized that somehow, impossibly, they were beginning to understand each other. The pack leader made a sound that was clearly a question, and Sarah found herself nodding before she consciously understood why. The communication wasn't happening through words or even through the visual displays on their fur. It was something deeper, more fundamental, as if the artifact was somehow facilitating a direct exchange of concepts and emotions. Through this strange new channel of communication, Sarah began to understand who these creatures were. They called themselves the Kithani, after the river that served as the lifeblood of their territory. They were not just intelligent animals, but a sophisticated civilization that had chosen to live in harmony with their natural environment, rather than dominating it. The pack she was meeting was actually a family unit, led by the individual Sarah thought of as the pack leader, whose name translated roughly as Silver who speaks with rivers. The young wolf she had saved was his youngest offspring, called Swift Current Dancer for its playful nature and love of the water. As the communication deepened, Sarah learned that the Kethani had been aware of the human colony since its establishment. They had watched from the forests as the humans built their settlements and began their research. Unlike many species that might have seen the newcomers as invaders, the Kethani had been curious about these strange creatures, who seemed to shape their environment rather than adapt to it. Silver who speaks with rivers conveyed a complex emotion that Sarah interpreted as cautious optimism. The Kethani had been waiting for a sign that humans could be trusted, that they were capable of the kind of selfless behavior that formed the foundation of Kethani society. Sarah's rescue of Swift Current Dancer had provided exactly that sign. Through the artifact, Sarah learned that the Kethani possessed technology far beyond what the human colonists had achieved, but they had chosen to integrate it so seamlessly with their natural environment that it was invisible to outside observers. Their buildings were grown rather than built, shaped from living trees that continued to thrive while providing shelter. Their tools were biological constructs that served their purpose while maintaining the ecological balance. The artifact in Sarah's hands was one of their greatest achievements, a translation device that could bridge the gap between any two forms of consciousness. It worked not by translating languages, but by facilitating direct transfer of concepts and emotions between minds. The Kethani had developed it over centuries, hoping that someday they would encounter another, intelligent species with whom they could share their world. Silver who speaks with rivers conveyed that giving the translator to Sarah was both a gesture of gratitude and a test. If humans proved worthy of the trust, This could be the beginning of an unprecedented partnership between species. If they proved unworthy, the Cathani would simply retreat deeper into their hidden cities and wait for the humans to move on. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Sarah realized that she was holding not just an alien artifact, but the future of human Cathani relations. Every decision she made from this point forward would influence whether humanity gained a powerful ally or lost the opportunity forever. Swift Current Dancer approached Sarah and gently touched the artifact with one paw. Through the device, Sarah felt the young Cathani's emotions directly. Gratitude so pure and deep it brought tears to her eyes, but also hope and excitement about the possibilities that this meeting represented. Silver who speaks with. Rivers rose and made a gesture that Sarah understood as an invitation. The family unit began to move toward the forest, but they moved slowly, clearly expecting Sarah to follow. The pack leader conveyed that they wanted to show her something that would help her understand the true nature of the choice before humanity. Sarah hesitated for only a moment. Her training told her to return to the colony immediately and report this contact to her superiors, but her heart told her that this opportunity might never come again. If she walked away now, the Cathani might disappear forever into their hidden world. She gathered her equipment quickly and followed the family into the forest. The moment she crossed the tree line, Sarah realized she was entering a world she had never imagined. What had appeared to be natural forest from the outside was actually a carefully cultivated environment where every tree, every plant, every element served multiple purposes. The path they followed was nearly invisible, marked only by subtle changes in the vegetation that the Cathani navigated with perfect confidence. As they moved deeper into the forest, Sarah began to notice structures that were so perfectly integrated with the natural environment that they were almost impossible to distinguish from the living trees. Swift Current Dancer stayed close to Sarah, clearly excited to be showing off their home to their rescuer. Through the translator, the young Cathani shared stories about life in the forest, about the games they played and the lessons they learned from their elders. Sarah was struck by how similar Cathani childhood was to human childhood, despite the vast differences in their species. As they walked, Silver who speaks with Rivers continued to share information about Cathani society. They were a peaceful people but not passive. They had faced challenges before, including contact with other species that had not ended well. They had learned to be cautious, to observe and evaluate before revealing themselves. The forest around them was alive with sounds that Sarah now realized were not just animal calls, but a complex communication network. The Cathani were in constant contact with each other, sharing information about the movement of their human guests through their territory. Sarah understood that she was being watched and evaluated by hundreds of individuals she couldn't see. The path began to slope upward, and Sarah noticed that the trees were growing larger and more magnificent with each step. Some of them were clearly ancient, their trunks so massive that it would take dozens of people holding hands to circle them. But these giants were not just trees. Sarah could see openings in their trunks, windows, and doorways that glowed with soft, natural light. They were approaching a city, Sarah realized. A city built from and within living trees, so perfectly integrated with the forest that it was invisible from any distance. The scale of it was breathtaking, suggesting a civilization that had been developing for thousands of years while leaving almost no mark on the natural environment. As they climbed higher, more Cathani appeared along the path. They watched Sarah with curiosity but without fear, clearly trusting Silver who speaks with Rivers' judgment about their unusual guest. Many of them displayed complex patterns in their fur as she passed, and through the translator, Sarah understood that they were sharing greetings, blessings, and expressions of wonder at meeting their first human. 3 days passed before Sarah returned to the river. Her duties at the colony's research station had kept her busy analyzing the water samples and filing reports about the local ecosystem. But she couldn't stop thinking about the young wolf-like creature and those impossibly intelligent amber eyes. Every quiet moment brought back the memory of that final look they had shared, and the strange sensation that she had been recognized, truly seen, by an alien intelligence. The morning was crisp and clear, as Sarah made her way back to the spot where she had pulled the creature from the water. She told herself she was returning for scientific purposes, to collect more samples and document the river's ecosystem more thoroughly. But deep down, she hoped to catch another glimpse of the remarkable animal she had saved. The river looked different in the early morning light. Mist rose from the water's surface, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Sarah set up her equipment and began her work, but she found herself constantly scanning the forest beyond the opposite bank. Every shadow seemed to hold the possibility of movement. Every rustle of leaves made her look up expectantly. She was bent over her microscope, examining a particularly interesting sample of river algae, when she heard it, a low melodious sound that seemed to come from multiple sources at once. It wasn't quite a howl, but it wasn't music either. It was something in between, something that made the hair on her arms stand up and sent a chill down her spine. Sarah straightened slowly, her scientific instruments forgotten. The sound came again, clearer this time, and she realized it was coming from the forest directly across from where she stood. She could see shapes moving between the trees, shadows that seemed too large and too purposeful to be random wildlife. Then they emerged into the open space beside the river, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There were 7 of them, all clearly the same species as the young one she had rescued. But these were adults. They were magnificent creatures, standing nearly as tall as a human at the shoulder, with the same shimmering fur that seemed to change color subtly in the light. Their movements were coordinated and graceful, speaking of intelligence and social organization far beyond what she had expected. But what truly shocked Sarah was their behavior. Instead of drinking from the river or hunting, they arranged themselves in a deliberate formation along the bank directly across from her. The largest of them, with fur that gleamed like silver and gold, stepped forward and fixed its gaze directly on her. Sarah felt frozen in place. These weren't just animals going about their daily routine. They had come here specifically, and they were watching her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how alone and vulnerable she was. Her hand moved instinctively toward her emergency communicator, but something made her hesitate. The large wolf's amber eyes, so similar to those of the young one she had saved, held no aggression. Instead, there was something that looked almost like curiosity, recognition. Sarah couldn't be sure, but every instinct told her that running would be the wrong choice. The pack leader made the same melodious sound she had heard before, and the others responded in harmony. It was clearly a form of communication, far more sophisticated than simple animal calls. The patterns and tones reminded Sarah of music, but with an underlying structure that suggested complex meaning. Then something extraordinary happened. From behind the adults, the young wolf she had rescued emerged into view. Its fur had regained its full luster, and it moved with complete confidence, showing no sign of its recent ordeal. But what made Sarah's heart race was the way it looked directly at her and made a specific sound, clearly different from the others. The pack's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Every adult head turned toward Sarah, and their postures shifted. Where before there had been cautious observation, now there was something that looked distinctly like gratitude. The young wolf began to move along the riverbank, staying on its side but clearly heading toward the narrowest part of the crossing. Sarah watched in fascination as it navigated the rocks with perfect confidence, as if retracing the path of its rescue. When it reached the spot where she had pulled it from the water, it stopped and looked directly at her again. What happened next defied everything Sarah thought she knew about animal behavior. The young wolf began to make specific gestures with its head and front paws, pointing between itself, the water, and Sarah. It was clearly communicating the story of its rescue to the watching pack, using a combination of vocalizations and body language that was far too complex to be mere instinct. The pack leader responded with a sound that was unmistakably approving. Then it did something that made Sarah question whether she was dreaming. The massive creature lowered its head in what was clearly a bow, holding the position for several seconds before raising its gaze to meet hers again. One by one, the other adults followed suit. 7 magnificent alien predators, each capable of tearing her apart without effort, bowing to a lone human scientist who had simply done what felt right. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had trained for years to study alien life forms, but nothing in her education had prepared her for this moment. This wasn't just animal behavior or even simple intelligence. This was culture, ceremony, communication across species lines that shouldn't have been possible. Slowly, carefully, Sarah lowered her head in response. She didn't know if the gesture would be understood, but it felt right. When she looked up again, she could swear the pack leader was pleased. The young wolf made another sound, different from the others, and began to move again. This time it was heading toward a narrow section of the river where the current was gentler. Sarah watched as it entered the water without hesitation, swimming across with strong, confident strokes. The adults watched tensely, ready to intervene if needed, but the crossing went smoothly. When the young wolf emerged on Sarah's side of the river, soaking wet but triumphant, she couldn't help but smile. It approached her slowly, stopping just within arm's reach. Its amber eyes held the same intelligence she remembered, but now there was something else. Trust. The young creature slowly reached into what Sarah now realized was a pouch-like structure hidden in its fur. With careful movements, it withdrew something and placed it on the ground between them. Then it stepped back and watched her expectantly. Sarah knelt down to examine the object. It was clearly artificial, beautifully crafted from some kind of metal she didn't recognize. The design was intricate, with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like the creature's fur. It was obviously valuable, and it was obviously meant for her. For me, Sarah whispered, looking up at the young wolf. The creature made a soft sound that somehow conveyed affirmation. It touched the object with one paw, then touched its own chest, then pointed to Sarah. The meaning was clear. This was a gift, freely given, from one intelligent being to another. Sarah picked up the object with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse gently, as if it contained some form of energy. The patterns on its surface shifted as she watched, creating designs of incredible beauty and complexity. When she looked up again, the young wolf was no longer alone. The pack leader had crossed the river as well, moving with the same fluid grace but radiating an authority that was unmistakable. It approached slowly, stopping just beside the younger animal. Sarah found herself face to face with what was clearly the alpha of a highly intelligent species. The pack leader's eyes held depths of wisdom and experience that reminded her more of a respected elder than a wild animal. When it spoke, the sounds it made were rich and complex, clearly directed at her. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. She was being welcomed, accepted, acknowledged as something more than just another species to be avoided or feared. She was being recognized as an individual worthy of respect and gratitude. Dr. Sarah Chen had always been drawn to the sound of rushing water. Even on this alien world 300 light-years from Earth, the Cathara River sang the same ancient song that rivers had sung since the beginning of time. She knelt beside the crystalline waters, filling her research containers with samples that might hold the key to understanding this planet's unique ecosystem. The Cathara colony had been humanity's first successful settlement beyond the local group, a testament to human ingenuity and determination. Sarah had volunteered for the xenobiology team, eager to study the fascinating life forms that called this world home. The planet's twin suns cast an ethereal glow through the canopy above, creating dancing patterns on the water's surface. A sharp yelp pierced the air, followed by a splash that made Sarah's head snap up. Something was struggling in the rapids 50 meters upstream, caught in the violent current where the river narrowed between two massive boulder formations. At first, she thought it might be debris, but the movement was too organic, too desperate. Sarah squinted against the sunlight reflecting off the water. The struggling form had fur that shimmered between silver and deep blue, and she caught glimpses of pointed ears and an elongated snout. It was clearly one of the indigenous species, though she had never seen anything quite like it in the colony's xenobiology reports. The creature was small, probably juvenile, and it was losing the battle against the current. Its head kept disappearing beneath the surface, only to emerge moments later with what sounded distinctly like coughing. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. As a xenobiologist, she knew the protocols about interfering with local wildlife, but as a human being, she couldn't watch any sentient creature drown. Without hesitation, Sarah kicked off her boots and dove into the river. The water was shockingly cold, much colder than the ambient temperature had suggested. The current was stronger than it looked from shore, and she had to fight to maintain her position while swimming toward the struggling animal. As she drew closer, she could see the creature more clearly. It was definitely canine in appearance, but unlike any Earth species. Its fur was thick and lustrous, designed for cold climates, and its limbs were longer and more graceful than a terrestrial wolf. Most striking were its eyes, a brilliant amber color that seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond what she expected from a simple predator. The young wolf-like creature saw her approaching, and its struggles intensified, either from fear or renewed hope. Sarah spoke in what she hoped was a soothing tone, though she knew the animal couldn't understand her words. "Easy there, little one. I'm here to help." Reaching the creature required all of Sarah's swimming ability. She had been on her university swim team, but this was different. The alien river seemed determined to claim its prize, and she had to use every technique she knew to position herself correctly. When she finally managed to get her arms around the young animal, she was surprised by how solid it felt despite its waterlogged appearance. The creature didn't fight her, which surprised Sarah. Instead, it seemed to understand that she was trying to help. Its amber eyes locked with hers, and she felt an odd sensation, as if the animal was trying to communicate something beyond mere gratitude. There was intelligence there, real intelligence, not just instinct. Getting back to shore proved even more challenging than reaching the animal. The combined weight made swimming difficult, and the current kept trying to push them downstream toward more dangerous rapids. Sarah's lungs burned as she fought for every meter, but she refused to give up. The young creature's breathing was becoming more labored, and she knew time was running out. When her feet finally touched the rocky bottom near the shore, Sarah's legs nearly gave out from exhaustion. She half carried, half dragged the young wolf to dry land, where it collapsed on the sun-warmed stones, sides heaving. Water streamed from its thick fur, and she could see that it was even more beautiful than she had realized. The creature was clearly exhausted but alive. Its breathing gradually returned to normal as Sarah checked for injuries. There were a few scrapes on its legs, probably from the rocks in the river, but nothing serious. She used her emergency medical kit to clean the wounds, noting how the animal remained perfectly still during the treatment, as if it understood she was helping. "You're going to be fine," Sarah murmured, running her hands gently through the creature's drying fur. "Just need to rest and warm up." As she worked, Sarah noticed details that made her realize this was no ordinary animal. The creature's bone structure was more refined than earth wolves, and its paws had partially opposable digits that suggested tool use. Most remarkably, the patterns in its fur seemed to shimmer and change slightly, almost like a form of communication. The young wolf watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, and Sarah had the distinct impression it was memorizing her face, her scent, every detail about her. When she offered it some of her emergency rations, it sniffed carefully, before accepting the food with what seemed like gratitude. As the afternoon wore on, the creature regained its strength. It stood on shaky legs, testing its balance, then sat and regarded Sarah with what she could only describe as curiosity. She talked to it softly, explaining who she was and why she was there, feeling somewhat foolish but also sensing that the animal was listening intently. "I should probably get you back to where you belong," Sarah finally said, though she felt oddly reluctant to let the creature go. "Your family is probably worried about you." At the word family, the young wolf's ears perked up dramatically. It looked toward the forest beyond the river, then back at Sarah, then toward the forest again. The message was clear. It wanted to go home, but it also wanted her to understand something. Sarah helped the creature to its feet, and together they walked toward the tree line. The young wolf moved with increasing confidence, but it kept looking back at her, as if making sure she was following. When they reached the edge of the forest, it stopped and turned to face her fully. What happened next would stay with Sarah for the rest of her life. The young wolf approached her slowly, then gently pressed its head against her hand, in what was unmistakably a gesture of gratitude. The patterns in its fur shifted and swirled, creating complex designs that seemed almost like written language. Then it looked directly into her eyes and made a sound that was clearly not random. It was deliberate, purposeful, almost like it was trying to say her name. Before Sarah could process this fully, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest, moving with a grace that spoke of perfect adaptation to its environment. Sarah stood at the forest's edge for a long time, wondering what she had just experienced. She had saved a drowning animal, nothing more. But something about the encounter felt significant beyond mere rescue. The intelligence in those amber eyes suggested this was just the beginning of something much larger. The journey back to the human colony felt like traveling between two different worlds, which in many ways it was. Sarah walked beside Silver Who Speaks with Rivers and Swift Current Dancer, carrying not just the translator artifact but also detailed biological samples, documentation techniques she had learned, and most importantly, the trust of an entire civilization. The Cathani had spent 3 days preparing for this moment. Master craftsmen had worked tirelessly to create additional translator artifacts, each one grown rather than built, shaped from living crystal that could bridge the gap between human and Cathani consciousness. Scientists had prepared samples of their biotechnology that could be safely studied by human researchers without causing ecological disruption. Most significantly, they had chosen a delegation of 5 individuals to accompany Sarah back to the colony. These Cathani represented different aspects of their civilization: a healer, a biotechnologist, a diplomat, a historian, and swift current dancer, whose role was to serve as a living reminder of the compassion that had started this entire process. As they approached the edge of the forest that bordered the human settlement, Sarah felt her nervousness growing. She had been gone for 5 days without any communication with the colony. Her colleagues would be worried, possibly even organizing search parties. And now she was returning with news that would challenge everything humans thought they knew about their place in the universe. The colony's sensor arrays detected their approach while they were still several kilometers away. Sarah could see the observation post tracking their movement, and she knew that emergency protocols were being activated. The sudden appearance of unknown life forms near the settlement would trigger immediate defensive measures. Using her communicator, Sarah contacted the colony's command center. "This is Dr. Chen requesting immediate priority communication with Director Harrison. I am approaching the settlement with diplomatic representatives of an indigenous intelligent species. I repeat, I'm accompanied by friendly diplomatic representatives. Do not engage. Do not activate defensive systems." The response was immediate and tense. "Dr. Chen, this is command. You've been missing for 5 days. Are you under duress? Are you being coerced?" "Negative, command. I am safe and acting of my own free will. The representatives with me are peaceful and wish to establish formal contact with our colony. I need to speak with Director Harrison immediately." There was a long pause before Director Harrison's voice came through the communicator. "Sarah, thank God you're safe. What's this about indigenous intelligence? Our surveys showed no signs of advanced civilization on this planet." Through the translator, Sarah could feel the amusement of the Cathani delegation. Silver, who speaks with rivers, conveyed gentle humor at human assumptions about what constituted signs of civilization. To human sensors, the Cathani cities appeared to be natural forest. Their technology was so perfectly integrated with the ecosystem that it was invisible to outside observation. "Director, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to trust me. 5 days ago, I rescued a drowning animal from the Cathara River. That animal was a juvenile member of a highly advanced species called the Cathani. They have been watching our colony since we arrived, and they've decided to make contact. The representatives with me can prove everything I'm saying. Sarah, you need to come in for debriefing immediately. Bring your representatives to the main conference facility. I'm activating diplomatic protocols and calling an emergency session with all department heads." The final approach to the colony was surreal. Sarah could see human personnel positioned at observation points, weapons ready but not aimed. The sight of armed humans caused some concern among the Cathani delegation, but the diplomat, whose name translated as bridge builder across differences, conveyed understanding. First contact situations were inherently dangerous, and both species had every right to be cautious. The colony's main conference facility had been hastily rearranged to accommodate the unusual meeting. Director Harrison waited with the heads of science, security, engineering, and communications departments. Their faces showed a mixture of skepticism, excitement, and barely controlled anxiety. When the Cathani delegation entered the room, the silence was profound. These humans were seeing alien intelligence for the first time, and the reality was overwhelming. The Cathani moved with grace and dignity, their fur patterns displaying formal greetings that needed no translation to convey peaceful intent. Sarah stepped forward, still carrying the original translator artifact. "Director Harrison, department heads, I present Silver, who speaks with rivers, leader of the Thornwood Cathani community, and his diplomatic delegation. They come in peace, seeking to establish mutually beneficial relations between our species." Director Harrison, a veteran administrator who had dealt with countless crises during the colony's establishment, rose slowly from his chair. On behalf of the human colony of New Cathara, I welcome you to our settlement. Dr. Chen, how are we supposed to communicate? Sarah held up the translator artifact. The Cathani have developed biological technology that facilitates direct communication between different forms of consciousness. With your permission, I'd like to demonstrate. The next hour was perhaps the most significant in human history. Using the translator artifacts, the two species began their first formal exchange of information. The Cathani delegation shared the basics of their civilization, their history, their technology, their philosophy of biological harmony. The humans reciprocated with information about Earth, about humanity's expansion into space, about their hopes and goals for the colony. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the head of the science department, was particularly fascinated by the Cathani biotechnology. Through the translator, she engaged in deep discussions with the biotechnologist about the possibilities for medical advancement and environmental management. The potential applications seemed limitless. Security Chief Marcus Webb was initially skeptical, pressing the Cathani about their military capabilities and intentions. Bridge Builder Across Differences responded with patience and transparency, explaining that the Cathani had defensive capabilities, but no tradition of aggressive warfare. Their conflicts were typically resolved through negotiation and consensus building. The historian of the delegation, called Keeper of Growing Stories, shared fascinating accounts of previous contact with other species. Some had led to lasting partnerships that benefited all involved. Others had ended in mutual withdrawal when cultural differences proved too great to bridge. A few had ended in tragedy when aggressive species had sought to exploit or dominate the Cathani. As the initial briefings concluded, Director Harrison called for a recess to allow the human leadership to discuss the situation privately. The Cathani delegation was provided with comfortable accommodations and time to explore the colony under careful supervision. In the private meeting that followed, the debate was intense. Some department heads argued for immediate full cooperation with the Cathani, seeing the tremendous benefits their technology could provide. Others counseled extreme caution, worried about the potential risks of cultural contamination or technological dependence. Dr. Reeves made the case for scientific cooperation. The medical applications alone could save thousands of lives across all human colonies. Their biotechnology could solve our food production problems, our environmental challenges, even our transportation limitations. We can't ignore this opportunity. Security Chief Webb remained skeptical. We know almost nothing about their true capabilities or intentions. What if this is some kind of elaborate test or manipulation? What if there are other Cathani factions with different agendas? Director Harrison listened to all perspectives before making his decision. We're going to proceed with formal diplomatic contact, but carefully and gradually. Dr. Chen will serve as our primary liaison, supported by a team of specialists from each department. We'll establish a joint research facility where both species can work together on projects of mutual benefit. The decision was communicated to the Cathani delegation, who received it with approval. Bridge Builder Across Differences conveyed that gradual contact was wisdom, allowing both species to build trust and understanding over time. Rushing into partnership without proper foundation had led to failures in the past. Over the following days, the framework for cooperation was established. A joint facility would be built at the forest's edge, designed using both human engineering and Cathani biotechnology. Research teams from both species would work on projects ranging from medical applications to environmental restoration. Swift Current Dancer became an unofficial ambassador, spending time with human children and helping them understand Cathani culture. The young Cathani's playful nature and obvious intelligence won over even the most skeptical colonists. Watching human and Cathani children play together, learning each other's games and sharing their different perspectives, provided a hopeful glimpse of the future. Sarah found herself at the center of a historic transformation. The simple act of rescuing a drowning animal had led to the first peaceful contact between humanity and a truly alien intelligence. But she also understood that this was just the beginning, the real work of building understanding and cooperation between two. 6 months had passed since first contact, and the joint research facility stood as a testament to what two species could accomplish when they worked together. The building itself was a marvel of hybrid technology, combining human engineering precision with Cathani biological architecture. Living walls breathed gently while regulating temperature and air quality. while human-designed laboratories provided the controlled environments necessary for detailed scientific research. Sarah walked through the facility's main corridor, marveling at how natural the cooperation had become. Human and Cathani researchers worked side by side, their collaboration facilitated by an expanding network of translator artifacts. The initial cultural barriers that had seemed so daunting were gradually dissolving as both species learned to appreciate each other's unique perspectives and capabilities. The medical wing had produced the most dramatic results. Dr. Reeves led a joint team that had successfully adapted Cathani healing organisms for human physiology. The first trials had been conducted on volunteers with chronic conditions that human medicine had been unable to treat effectively. The results were remarkable: accelerated healing, enhanced immune function, and in some cases, the complete reversal of degenerative diseases. But perhaps more importantly, the collaboration was changing how humans thought about medicine itself. The Cathani approach of working with biological systems rather than against them was revolutionizing human medical practice. Instead of fighting disease with drugs and surgery, researchers were learning to encourage the body's own healing mechanisms through biological partnerships. Sarah found Swift Current Dancer in the facility's educational wing, where the young Cathani was teaching a group of human children about forest ecology. The lesson was taking place in a living classroom, where walls displayed real-time biological processes, and the floor was covered with a soft, moss-like surface that responded to touch by revealing the hidden networks of root systems and microbial communities. Through the translator, Swift Current Dancer was explaining how every element of the forest was connected, how the health of the whole depended on the balance of its parts. The human children, their eyes wide with wonder, asked endless questions about how trees communicated and how animals fit into the larger ecosystem. One child, a girl named Emma, whose parents were both colony engineers, raised her hand. Swift Current Dancer, could humans become part of the forest network too? The young Cathani's fur pattern shifted to display excitement and approval. Through the translator, Swift Current Dancer explained that this was exactly what the partnership between their species was working toward. Not just living alongside nature, but becoming part of it while maintaining their unique human characteristics. Sarah smiled as she watched the interaction. These children were growing up with an understanding of interspecies cooperation that would have been impossible just months earlier. They were the first generation to see Cathani and humans as natural partners rather than alien strangers. In the biotechnology wing, human engineers were working with Cathani life shapers to develop new solutions for colony infrastructure. Traditional human buildings required constant maintenance and energy input to remain functional. But the hybrid structures they were developing would be self-maintaining and even self-improving over time. The prototype residential unit was a perfect example of this new approach. From the outside, it looked like a beautiful treehouse, perfectly integrated with the surrounding forest. But inside, it featured all the amenities humans required: climate control, communication systems, food preparation areas, and private spaces for rest and work. The structure powered itself through biological processes, purified its own air and water, and even grew food in integrated garden spaces. The most exciting project was taking place in the transportation department. Human aerospace engineers were working with Cathani star vessel pilots to develop new spacecraft that combined the best of both technologies. The hybrid designs featured living hulls that could repair themselves and adapt to different environments, while incorporating human navigation systems and propulsion technologies. The first prototype was nearing completion, and it represented more than just a new type of spacecraft. It was humanity's ticket to true galactic exploration, no longer limited by the constraints of purely mechanical technology. With Cathani biological systems providing life support and self-repair capabilities, human ships could venture farther into space and sustain longer missions than ever before. But the most significant developments were happening at a deeper level, in the realm of philosophy and culture. The Cathani concept of biological harmony was influencing human thinking about everything from urban planning to social organization. The colony's governing council had begun experimenting with Cathani-style consensus building, seeking solutions that benefited everyone rather than simply following majority rule. Sarah had been appointed as the official human Cathani liaison, a position that required her to spend equal time with both communities. She had established a residence in the Cathani Forest City, where she continued to learn about their culture and philosophy. The experience was transforming her understanding of what civilization could be. Living among the Cathani had taught her that progress didn't require domination over nature. Their cities had existed for thousands of years without causing environmental damage, because they worked with natural systems rather than against them. Their technology was so advanced that it appeared magical, yet it was based on principles of cooperation and sustainability that humans were only beginning to understand. The evening sun cast long shadows through the joint facility as Sarah made her way to the communication center. Tonight marked a special milestone, the first transmission to Earth containing news of the Cathani contact. The message had been carefully crafted by both species, designed to convey the magnitude of the discovery while emphasizing the peaceful nature of the contact. Director Harrison was waiting in the communications center, along with bridge builder across differences and several other key figures from both species. The transmission would take years to reach Earth, but it would fundamentally change humanity's understanding of their place in the universe. "Are we ready?" Director Harrison asked, his voice carrying the weight of history. Sarah nodded, holding the translator artifact that would allow the Cathani delegation to contribute directly to the message. Both species are ready to share this moment with Earth. The transmission began with Sarah's voice, telling the story of the rescue that had started everything. She described her first encounter with Swift Current Dancer, the revelation of Cathani intelligence, and the careful process of building trust and understanding between the species. Bridge builder across. Differences contributed the Cathani perspective, explaining their philosophy of biological harmony and their hopes for partnership with humanity. The diplomat conveyed their species' experience with other civilizations and their belief that diversity of thought and approach made all species stronger. The message included detailed scientific data about Cathani biotechnology, medical discoveries that could save millions of human lives, and environmental solutions that could help Earth recover from centuries of industrial damage. But perhaps most importantly, it included proof that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that peaceful coexistence with alien intelligence was not only possible, but beneficial for all involved. As the transmission ended, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The simple act of compassion that had led her to rescue a drowning animal had grown into something far greater than she had ever imagined. The partnership between humans and Cathani was still in its early stages, but the foundation was strong and the possibilities were limitless. Swift Current Dancer approached as the group began to disperse, the young Cathani's fur patterns displaying contentment and gratitude. Through the translator, Sarah felt the depth of their friendship, a bond that had transcended species barriers and become something entirely new. "Do you ever regret jumping into that river?" Swift Current Dancer asked through the translator. Sarah laughed, remembering the cold shock of the water and her complete ignorance of what she was setting in motion. "Never for a moment. That was the most important decision I've ever made, even though I had no idea at the time." The young Cathani's pattern shifted to display amusement. "My pack leader says that the most important decisions are often made without thinking, when the heart speaks louder than the mind." As they walked together toward the forest city, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that day by the river. The human colony was thriving, its population growing healthier and more sustainable through Cathani biotechnology. The Cathani were benefiting from human innovation and creativity, finding new solutions to challenges they had faced for centuries. More importantly, both species were learning that diversity was strength. The differences between human and Cathani approaches to life and technology weren't obstacles to overcome, but complementary assets that made their partnership more powerful than either species could be alone. Looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah thought about the future. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and now humanity had a partner in exploring it. Other